Good morning, and for some of you, good afternoon. It's a little bit early of the webinar this time, but I'm really happy to welcome you all. So again, good morning to everyone joining us from different parts of the world and predominantly from our Asian Pacific members and colleagues. So on behalf of Talitha International Coordinating Committee, it's really my honor to welcome you all to this webinar. So our topic or entitled our webinar is a systemic change, as you can see in our screen, in the face of new vulnerabilities to human trafficking. So again, your presence here reflects our shared commitment to addressing one of the most urgent and complex realities of our time, which is human trafficking. For those of you just joining, we have interpretation actually. If you can see your icons at the bottom of the screen, choose your own languages. So hopefully that you're able to also to listen our interpreters. Yeah. So most of us are really speaking in English. So hopefully you can really accept Sister Carmen. We are very first special honored to have with our speakers here today who will guide us and enrich our reflection. So our keynote speaker, Sister Jean Quinn, will offer us a deep insight into the call for systemic change. And we also hear from the voices of our Talitha network, including Sister Kayula from Zambia and Marilyn from United States, which is too early for her, but she's with us, who will share their experiences from the grassroots where the realities of vulnerability and resilience are lived every day. So this webinar is not only a space for listening, but also for dialogue. So we will have an opportunities to interact, to share experiences, and to deepen our understanding of advocacy through breakout session. We will have a breakout session, and of course the panel question and answer segment. So to begin, I would like also to take this opportunity that we will be announcing for the launching of the Port Talitha study packet as part of this webinar. This study packet is a kit for prayer and action. This resource was carefully compiled by the TKCC or the Talitha International Coordinating Committee and was also reviewed by Professor Silvia Scarpa from John Cabot University. So their dedication and expertise have helped ensure that this tool is both meaningful and, of course, relevant to our shared mission. So without further ado, let's begin our webinar and take a moment to center ourselves in prayer. So I now invite Sister Dayalini to lead us in a short prayer. Thank you.
Let us enter into a moment of silence to see what is often unseen, to hear voices that are silenced, to open our hearts to truth. May our silence lead to awareness. May awareness lead to action. As we gather for this important mission of confronting human trafficking, let us first place ourselves in the presence of God, the God who sees every hidden suffering and hears every silenced cry. As we enter into this prayer, I invite you to journey with this reflection. Loving God, open our eyes to hidden wounds. Give us courage to act. Transform our hearts to transform systems. We make this prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Sister Dayalini, for that powerful prayer. So as we continue this webinar in a spirit of reflection, openness, and shared commitment, this gathering is part of our ongoing journey of Talitha as a global network, especially following our General Assembly in May 2024, and many of you have attended that our assembly. More than 150 delegates from 71 countries came together to share experiences and, of course, reflect on the realities of human trafficking in different contexts. So from this global process, a clear priority emerged for 2025 to 2030 priorities, a systemic change in the pace of emerging vulnerabilities. So in this context, we are officially launching the Talitha study packet, a kit for prayer and action, systemic change in the face of new vulnerabilities to human trafficking. So this study package supports our shared commitment to this priority and help us deepen our response as a global network. Human trafficking is not only caused by individual criminals, as many of you know already, it is also sustained by complex and interconnected systems. These include poverty, lack of opportunities, gender inequality, conflict, and unfair migration policies. It's also linked to the demand for cheap labor and sexual exploitation. As today, we are also see growing risks in the digital world, and especially affected many people, especially young people. These realities are interconnected, and together they created conditions of vulnerability that can lead to exploitation. So if trafficking is rooted in systemic causes, then our response must also be systemic. This means we are called to work together to this priority, support women, children, and young people that they can live in a safe and just condition, address root causes, I think next slide, address root causes trafficking, including reducing demand and promoting the education of boys and men. Advocate for strong laws and policies and for justice for victims and survivors, especially for the protection of migrants, refugees, and displaced population. Promote safe and regular migration as well as integration and protection for people on the move. And raise awareness about online risks, in particular fraud, online recruitment, and supporting families and young people to use digital spaces safely. So this is all you find in our first priority in this declaration. This kind of change takes time. It requires collaboration, commitment, and trust. But it is also possible when we act together. So in this context, this packet helps us to better understand the cause of human trafficking. It supports us in planning and working together, and it connects reflection and concrete advocacy and response. This is also invite us to listen more deeply to communities, to survivors, and to one another. It helps us to connect local experiences with global realities and encourage us to act together in a more coordinated and effective way. I warmly invite all members of the Talitha Network and our partners to use this study packet actively as a guide for prayer, a tool for advocacy, and a support for shared action. Our strength is in unity. When we walk together, our impact grows. Ending human trafficking requires courage to challenge unjust system and to act even when change is difficult. It also requires hope and perseverance. So together we can help shape a world where every person lives with dignity and freedom. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our speakers who will share both experience and live-in experience in advocacy to help guide and inspire us. So thank you all for being here, part of this journey, and I look forward for our engaging conversation and share today. So right now, I'd like to invite Sister Carmen to introduce our keynote speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. In Spanish, please. Presento a la hermana Jen King. Ella es miembro de la Congregación de las Hijas de la Sabiduría y una comprometida defensora de la justicia social. Ha desempeñado cargos de liderazgo dentro de su congregación y de la Conferencia de Religiosos de Irlanda. En Dublín fundó Casa Sofía, organización que apoya a mujeres y niños. Desde 2017 es directora ejecutiva de UNANIMA International en las Naciones Unidas en Nueva York, donde lidera iniciativas de incidencia global centradas en la falta de hogar, el derecho a la vivienda, la migración y la protección de mujeres y niños. Bienvenida, hermana Jane. Tiene 20 minutos para su presentación. Adelante.
Thank you so much, Sister Carmen. And it's so good to be with you all. It's such a privilege for me to be with such a distinguished group of people that have given themselves over a long time to this initiative. So it's a privilege to be here. I happen to be in Dublin. I came to Dublin a few days ago for other commitments I had, so I'm happy to be here early on a beautiful, bright, sunny morning, looking at systemic change in the face of new vulnerabilities to human trafficking. And as you all know, we have in UNANIMA International, and I noticed Sister Kayula is there as well, we've always connected our work with trafficking. All of the work, even though the last 10 years we focused significantly on homelessness at the UN so that we could bring in all the intersectionalities of that issue, which included trafficking. Human trafficking evolves alongside society. As technology, migration patterns, labor markets, and global crises shift, so do the vulnerability that traffickers exploit. This reality forces a deeper question for me. Meaningful systemic change look like when the landscape of exploitation keeps transforming? At its core, systemic change requires moving beyond reactive measure and towards reshaping the conditions that allow traffickers to take root. New vulnerabilities, such as the digital recruitment, climate-driven displacement, widening economic inequality, and the isolation created by global emergencies, highlight how interconnected the problem truly is. Each emergency risk exposes a gap in social protection systems. We've done a lot of work on this. Governance or collective awareness. A systemic response begins with acknowledging that trafficking is not an isolated crime, but a symptom of broader structural iniquities, which Sister Abby has just said. Strengthening labour protections, expanding access to safe migration pathways, and ensuring that digital platforms are designed with safety in mind and are all part of the same ecosystems of prevention. When people have stable livelihoods, legal protections, and trustworthy institutions, the space for exploitation narrows. It's so important to hear that. Technology adds another layer. While it can be misused to target vulnerable individuals, it also can be harnessed to detect patterns, support survivors, and increase transparency in supply chains. Systemic change means ensuring that innovation is paired with accountability, ethical design, and cross-sector collaboration. Equally important is centering the voices of survivors. This is my passion, whether it's homelessness, trafficking, people experiencing poverty. The voices of survivors are the most important for me. Their lived experience reveals where systems fail and where they can be rebuilt. Survivor-informed policy, trauma-aware services, and long-term support are not optional. They are essential to creating structures that prevent re-victimization and promote genuine recovery. That's a really important piece to hear. Ultimately, systemic change is not a single reform, but a sustained commitment to strengthening the social fabric. It requires governments, communities, businesses, individuals to recognize their interconnected roles. As new vulnerabilities emerge, the response must be adapted, rooted in human dignity, and focused on addressing the underlying conditions that make exploitation possible. To harm, but proactively protective of human freedom. And for all of us, the challenge is ongoing, but so is the opportunity to build systems that are not only reactive. Emma, can I start, please, with slide 1, 2? So we're going to begin to look at advocacy in the face of the new vulnerabilities related to human trafficking. And so for me, it's about recognizing how trafficking evolves and making sure our responses evolve with it. Core idea is that traffickers adapt quickly. We all know that. So advocates must stay one step ahead, socially, legally, technologically, and culturally. Also, always have to be that step ahead. So the most effective advocacy today focuses on identifying emerging vulnerabilities, strengthening protective systems, and building survivor-centered, tech-informed strategies that match the speed and sophistication of modern trafficking networks. Next slide, please. The new vulnerabilities that must be addressed today include, as I just said, digital exploitation and online recruitment, the social media platforms in all their places. There are so many, couldn't even begin to name them. The AI-generated content and youth and grooming. Next slide, please. Digital exploitation has become the hunting ground for traffickers, primary hunting ground for traffickers, especially the youth. Trafficking has moved online and our systems haven't kept pace with it. Traffickers now use mainstream platforms to identify, groom, and recruit victims, especially younger people. Online recruitment is faster and harder to detect and often happens long before any adult notices something is wrong. Prevention strategies built for in-person recruitment no longer match digital reality. Next slide, please. So, in that sphere of digital dangers, technology is enabling new forms of coercion. You have digital blackmail, threats to share private images and manipulation through messaging apps. Live stream exploitation means harm can occur without physical movement, making detection harder, and how that has changed over the years. The AI-generated images and fake personas are emerging tools for grooming and deception. Other vulnerabilities we include are the economic instability, and these are the pressures that are increasing vulnerability. With the informal labour markets, the delivery apps, which are here in Dublin, I see them everywhere outside here where I live, the domestic work, construction, agriculture, they all create conditions where exploitation can hide in plain sight. And isn't that just the fear? So traffickers exploit basic needs, food, shelter, and safety to build dependency. So what are the before I go on to the advocacy strategies, I also like to talk about the climate-driven displacement, because that's really important to us as well, where extreme weather events and long-term environmental changes push people into unsafe migration pathways. Displaced populations often rely on strugglers who can shift into traffickers when deaths or vulnerabilities escalate. And so the big one, of course, for me is this whole area of housing insecurity and youth homelessness. And particularly for the LGBTQ plus community, those coming from foster care that involve youth and those facing family rejections, these are the people that are disproportionately targeted. And that's where, in the last slide, I said that traffickers exploit basic needs, food, shelter, safety, to build dependency. And so that's their whole raison d'etre, if you like. So the the next slide, please. Thanks. This, I suppose, is one of my passions, is how are we going to go about advocacy? We need advocacy that meets these emerging threats. So we need to push for stronger online safety. This is the work that we have to continue to do. And if I may say so at this time, and Kayula will also agree with me, we spend our time on advocacy all the time, every day. And I think that's what we have to keep doing. So that's why we push for stronger online safety, advocate for digital literacy programs both in schools and youth centres, and promote laws addressing deepfake, exploitation, and online coercion. Next slide. And so regarding labour and economic advocacy, we need to strengthen worker protections in high-risk industries, as I said earlier, hospitality, agriculture, and domestic work. And that's still a big issue. We have to advocate for fair work standards, support immigration policies that reduce vulnerability to exploitation. Next slide. In regards to climate response advocacy, we need to integrate trafficking prevention into disaster response planning. Sometimes some of this, the prevention is siloed. It's not, a more integrated prevention disaster services. So we need to do that. Train emergency responders to recognise signs of exploitation and advocate for safe migration pathways and community resilient programmes. So this is a very important one, and maybe many of you will agree with this, particularly for youth-focused advocacy, to expand trauma-informed services in schools, shelters and foster care. Anyone who works with me at the UN in New York knows I advocate certainly a weekly basis, if not twice weekly, with member states around trauma-informed services, that they get this word into their heads, because people don't want to talk about trauma, because if they talk about trauma, then they have to own what they're talking about. We can talk about that again later, but I have a huge passion around this. Advocate for housing first models for youth experiencing homelessness, and support culturally competent services for the LGBTQ and youth and communities of colour. And then we have survivor-centred legal advocacy. We need to promote prosecution models that reduce relying on victim testimony. Again, another passion of mine. People who have an experience and can give a testimony. We don't feel that we have to all the time rely on victim testimony, because now they are leading us in a whole different way. We need to push for long-term funding for survivor services, not just short-term rescue operations. And I guess as we move into the future, remember the AI is reshaping the landscapes of exploitation. And if we don't build protection now, traffickers will continue to outpace us. We need coordinated action through tech, policy, education, and the community sectors to ensure AI becomes a tool for safety and not a tool for harm. So the principles for all of us that should guide all our advocacy must protect people, not just fight a crime. The most important principle is that survivors' safety, dignity, and autonomy come first. And so this means that we must have survivor leadership, both in policy design and program development. They should have, it's their voice that will shape what we are needing in the future. Their consent and comfort guide in how their stories are used. So we can't just automatically presume we've heard a story, so we just use it. And the person suddenly discovers that their story is out there. I know it's not how you do it, but I'm just saying it just again to remind me and all of us. Trauma-informed practices that avoid criminalizing victims. One of the important things is their needs, survivors' needs, not organization agendas, drive advocacy priorities. So victims' needs, not organizational agendas, drives advocacy priorities. Long-term support, recognizing that recovery is not linear. So these are really important principles that guide all our advocacy. And this avoids tokenism and ensures advocacy reflects real life experiences. Next slide, Emma. So we have to have a human rights framework, and I think you're all pretty up to date with all the human rights frameworks that there are. But what I think we have to say is that we have to say and recognize that trafficking is a human rights violation, and it's not just a crime. It emphasizes freedom, equality, and protection from exploitation. It challenges systems that make people vulnerable and avoids approaches that punishes or stigmatizes people. And when we look at those, this keeps the focus on people, not just on prosecutions. So again, that's really important. Next slide. In the work we do, let us cause no harm. And I have to keep saying that to myself and others all the time. Even well-intentioned advocacy can cause harm if not handled carefully. So the principles required are protecting survivors' privacy and confidentiality and ensuring interventions don't increase risk. And the goal really is to help not, there's a little message coming over my slide there, but that's okay. The goal is to help, not unintentionally re-traumatize or endanger. And none of us mean that, but that can happen unintentionally. So we always have to be aware, as I think Sister Abby said at the beginning, or it was in the prayer, creating awareness. Next slide, please. So evidence-based advocacy. Anti-trafficking work is often clouded by myths or exaggerated claims. So effective advocacy uses reliable data, And I think that is the one thing that I probably learned a lot at the UN in New York and Geneva. We have to have data, but we have to have reliable data. And having that, there's accountability. We have to have clear definitions distinguishing trafficking from consensual migration or labour. And I may talk to you about this later, but when I look at clear definitions, I can't tell you, I'm there 12 years at the UN, and we're still trying to get a clear definition on homelessness. So I think clear definitions are important in order to support survivor leadership, etc. Honest communication about what is known and unknown. It's better to be honest in relation to communication. And so if we do that, that builds creativity and avoids harmful moral panic in accompanying people through the...
Excuse me, Sister Jane, please, 2
Yes.
minutes to finish.
Thank you so much. Okay, so in terms of, let's get on to policy engagement in the face of new vulnerabilities to human trafficking, requires a shift towards survivor-centred, evidence-driven and context-responsive strategies, especially as economic instability, conflict and emergent technologies reshape how exploitation occurs. The research that is out there now points to 3 major points on the subject where policy engagement is evolving: survivor-centred domestic policy, evidence-based programme coordination, and international technological vulnerability management. Just very quickly, policy engagement on human trafficking means that governments, civil society, and international bodies must work together to shape laws, strategies, and coordinated actions to prevent trafficking, protect victims, and prosecute offenders. And the last piece I need to see is about the church in promoting justice and protecting the most vulnerable. And I think we've had good examples of this recently with Pope Leo, where Pope Leo spoke. He spoke all the things we would want to speak to power in relation to injustice, and we have good following in that. One thing I want to say as I'm now coming to the end, I have to leave out many things, but anyway, you get a copy of what I've said. 10 days ago, I was invited to what I would have called a prestigious dinner at the UN, hosted by the Irish ambassador. And being a daughter of wisdom, around a table with all these member states, there were people from human rights in Geneva, etc., the EU were there. And I was there to speak on homelessness. What's interesting was it reminded me of our own spirituality, where wisdom builds her table and we sit and we eat and do all the things we do. And I related that to us sitting around the table, that it was table conversation. It wasn't talking to the next one to you, but talking about what is important to the world, to the UN, to the EU, to grassroots. And one of the important issues that the Irish ambassador wanted to talk about was homelessness. This is where good advocacy takes place. And I think that's been really important. Sorry to rush the end, but I enjoy these conversations and I know they can go on a bit. So thank you for listening to me, and I can answer any questions at a later time. Thank you so much, Sister Carmen.
Muchísimas gracias, hermana Jane. Estamos con tiempo. Como usted bien ha dicho, la trata avanza con la sociedad y eso es muy serio, porque los traficantes se adaptan increíblemente. La tecnología agrega un nivel de explotación actualmente y por lo tanto requiere pues mucho cuidado, sobre todo para los jóvenes, pero esta herramienta también se puede utilizar para proteger. También ha mencionado que las voces de los supervivientes es lo más importante. Ahí es donde comienza la reconstrucción para crear nuevas estructuras para un nuevo tejido social. También, pues, cómo el desplazamiento por el clima impulsa hacia caminos inseguros de explotación. Por lo tanto, pues, ¿cómo vamos a afrontar la incidencia? Nuestra respuesta necesita ser sistémica. Y mientras las nuevas vulnerabilidades surgen, pues necesitamos estar muy atentas para proteger la libertad y la dignidad humana. Nuestro gran desafío es saber identificar a tiempo esas vulnerabilidades para incidir adecuadamente. Y, por supuesto, la incidencia requiere un apoyo a largo plazo. Como bien lo mencionó, mucho no se quiere hablar del trauma, pero la afectación es muy grande. La recuperación no es lineal. Por lo tanto, pues necesitamos ese marco de derechos humanos para proteger a todas las personas. Muchísimas gracias, hermana Jane. Ahora voy a presentar a la hermana Kayula. Ella pertenece a la Congregación de Hermanas de la Caridad. Lleva 24 años dedicada a la defensa de los derechos humanos y la justicia social. Ha trabajado con los apostolados sociales jesuitas, el Servicio Jesuita Refugiados y el Centro Jesuita de Reflexión Teológica. En 2014, el Papa Francisco la nombró miembro de la Comisión Pontificia para la Protección de Menores, cargo que ocupó durante 8 años. Actualmente es coordinadora nacional de Talitha Zambia y coordinadora regional de Talitha África, integrante del Comité Internacional de Talitha. Muchas gracias, hermana Kayula. Tienes 10 minutos. Adelante.
Thank you very much. I better go into it before the 10 minutes go. One of the things that we have done as Talitha Zambia in order to contribute to systemic change is to actually sit on the National Anti-Human Trafficking Committee, where line ministries are represented in terms of, government. We were intentional in asking to sit on such a committee because, as Jean said, it is those conversations that shape policy. So we sit there, and when we are reviewing a law, for example, the anti-human trafficking law of 2008 was considered in 2022, we had to be there, to give inputs in what we wanted. For example, one of the things that was not there in Zambia was to actually have the committee. There was just in the Ministry of Home Affairs, Internal Security, there was just one person who made the secretariat who was dealing with the issue of human trafficking. But now we have the committee, the anti-human trafficking department with 16 or more people, which is addressing, different things. So we also have to consider regulations. And as we sit on this committee, we also observe, because we work very close with government, we observe how, for example, the law enforcers are implementing, such policy frameworks as the national referral mechanism. So we noticed that a significant number of law enforcement officials do not differentiate between human smuggling and human trafficking. And so if human trafficking is mistaken for human smuggling, like a person offering to be smuggled, is punishable in Zambia. So you could find a person who is a victim of human trafficking, being charged with human smuggling. So to go a step further, apart from advocacy, we actually now work with the ministry to train the officers, law enforcement officers, to differentiate these two concepts. As Jean pointed out, it is in the definition that you get, parameters. So we do that. Apart from that also, we find that there's a national referral mechanism in place, and we have input into it, but it's not being utilized by officers in remote places, especially where maybe vulnerable migrants may be found, or victims of human trafficking, again, we bring that as people who are at the grassroots from our Talitha networks, we bring that to the table when we sit, on this committee. Aside from that, also, we listen to victims of human trafficking or potential victims of human trafficking. So we are engaged in what we call transit monitoring at 3 border points, Zambia, Namibia, Malawi, and then Zambia, Tanzania. So what we do is to intercept. We have a profile of people that we approach. Our officers approach people, migrants as they travel. They are looking out, obviously, for certain clues to see, could this be a case of human trafficking? And when we actually see that, yes, we approach the person, talk to them, and when we see that indeed they were before they are exploited, they were actually in the process of human, being trafficked. So this leads to arrest, first of all, for the suspected offenders, but also for, then we rescue the potential victims. And because mostly their vulnerability would have been, they're in context of poverty. So we refer them to social protection programs that government run, or ourselves as Zambia Association of Sisterhoods, which is the mother body for Talitha Zambia. We refer them to some of the programs for empowerment, apart from evangelization, doing evangelization with them as well. Apart from that, what we also see significant in terms of advocacy is looking at root causes, like some cultural practices. I think for me that are very important because in a way they are there, but addressing them is more difficult than what is actually provided in the law. So, for example, in Zambia, it's not uncommon within the extended family system to send children for, families that are not doing well economically are likely to send children to affluent families within the family system, or even with friendship systems. So this has really put, especially children, especially the girls, have really been put in a position of vulnerability to domestic servitude, because first of all, they are in a private home. How would you get to that private home and say, this is a case of human trafficking? How would you know? So this is why, as Talitha, we really emphasize bringing communities together, as well, even within the Catholic group, so that we can discuss this. When does it become human trafficking? And when is it that someone is looking after this particular person because they are vulnerable? And, that sphere, the private sphere, for us is actually such a challenge. But bringing groups for dialogue have actually helped people coming out. Oh, actually, I didn't realize this was trafficking. Apart from that, we've also taken interest in promoting safe migration. So we bring media, government, and other stakeholders together so that we can, in a way, sensitize the public about, the regular pathways. And this is very important because we have seen that in our neighboring countries, a lot of migrants, a significant number of migrants take irregular migration pathways. And sometimes they also seek smugglers to bring them through Zambia to South Africa, where they think they could have a livelihood. So what we do, because when government arrests such migrants, they are prosecuted and put in prison. They are taken as prohibited migrants because they do not have the documents. So we go into correctional facilities, again, working with government to profile. That means we talk to the person, we realize, some of them would have been trafficked, and then we work with the immigration department in order to ensure their safe return so that they do not now go irregularly. And we have also seen that some cases that began as human smuggling have turned into human trafficking, because then the smuggler wants to make more money on the victim that on the person that now becomes a victim of human trafficking. Now, in terms of approach, what we found useful, partnerships. I must say that we've been great at that in terms of working very closely with government, NGOs like Save the Children, international organizations like the UNHCR and other bodies, bring them together. Even it's very rare actually that we just work on our own, even when it's coming up with a strategic plan, all these stakeholders are invited. When we are going to train the police, they are also there, if it's law enforcers from the Drug Enforcement Commission, from ZICTA now. Don't ask me, but it deals with online safety. I'm used to the acronym. So we found partnership a very, significant tool for doing our human trafficking work of advocacy. But also, the challenge that we find, though, is that sometimes, especially with regard to internal trafficking vis-a-vis domestic servitude, it's how to provide alternatives. When parents, for example, want their children to go and to be placed in those affluent homes where they don't do any follow-up because they don't have the resources to do that. So how do you then, this thin line I talked about between our practices of caring for our, relatives within the family system and human trafficking. And, sometimes when exploitation without being trafficked become widespread, it's very difficult then to see which is human trafficking, which is just exploitation. If we go by the elements, that define human trafficking. In moving forward, I think what I would like to say is that advocacy needs to be amplified, especially in the networks that have focused more just on raising awareness. Yes, it's very important to raise awareness so that people know, but focusing on systemic change becomes, significant, whether it's dealing with cultural norms, whether it's dealing with the law, but also seeing connections. Let me give an example of Zambia. We have government social protection programs that the poor people should access. But sometimes we find that the people who are comfortable are the ones accessing. Meanwhile, we are just raising awareness. But how can we not then look at how could the poorest people actually, how could we facilitate the poorest people to access those programs? So seeing those connections, sometimes that's what I see as a gap. So advocacy can never be, overemphasized. I think changing the system helps so many people. I end here.
Adelante, hermana. ¿Ya no se escucha nada?
Oh,
Sister
really?
Carmen,
I'm
Sister
here.
Carmen, it's yours. Yeah.
Okay.
You didn't hear
Carmen.
anything?
No, we're good. We're good, Kayula.
Ah,
Now it's your
muchas
turn, Carmen.
gracias, hermana Kayula. Has expuesto la importancia de la incidencia, de ese proceso que le da forma a las políticas públicas, que son efectivamente esas conversaciones respecto a la realidad. Por eso es muy importante estar presentes en esos espacios de decisión para aportar con nuestra propia voz. Y también has mencionado pues esta necesidad de formar a los oficiales, a los agentes de gobierno, quienes muchas veces confunden a las víctimas de trata con las víctimas del tráfico, pero también exactamente es importante reconocer que ahora muchísimos casos que empezaron como tráfico se convierten en casos de trata. Entonces, Hablaste también de esas prácticas culturales. Vamos viendo que la trata con fines de explotación laboral pues va creciendo, sobre todo en el servicio doméstico, y cómo realmente es un gran desafío cuando son los propios padres, la propia familia quien está de acuerdo en enviar a sus hijos, hijas jóvenes a esos lugares, y pues es más difícil reconocer la explotación. Muchísimas gracias, hermana Kayula, y pues seguiremos profundizando en esto. Pues presento ahora a Marilyn Zigmund. Ella es abogada colegiada en el Distrito de Columbia y en la Mancomunidad de Pensilvania. Es directora de incidencia política de la Alianza para acabar con la trata de personas. Se desempeña como líder nacional que ejemplifica la misión, la visión y los valores de la alianza. Sus intereses incluyen la seguridad en línea para niños, la codirección del programa NextGen de la alianza, la oratoria y la educación y la redacción eficaz. Ha trabajado con todos los niveles de gobierno y cuenta con más de 25 años de experiencia profesional en organizaciones del sector público y privado. Y también ahora siente que su vocación es trabajar con las religiosas católicas. Muchas gracias, Marilyn, por estar con nosotras. Tienes 10 minutos para tu presentación. Adelante.
Thank you, Sister Carmen, and thank you, Sister Abby, for inviting me. When Sister Abby asked me to present today, I thought that I would give an overview of what we do here in the U.S. in terms of our structure, and then share with you from an advocacy perspective what works best in terms of our work here for the Alliance. On the next slide, you'll see that the Alliance started as a group of 15 sisters who were engaged in anti-trafficking work, and they came together in Washington, D.C. to be the voice for anti-trafficking efforts here. At the time that they formed the alliance, there was no one working in the anti-trafficking space. We have now grown, we call this a mustard seed ministry. We have now grown to over 200 congregations of Catholic sisters and others who share our vision. We focus primarily in a number of areas, of course, advocacy has been described today, as well as survivor services, faith resources, and we do a number of educational events. We are very proud to be the U.S. representative for Talitha. On the next slide, you'll see in terms of the U.S. system, we have a three-tiered checks and balance process. So we have an executive branch, which is primarily under our president. We have a legislative branch, which is what we call our Congress, where laws are developed and passed. And then we have the judicial branch, which represents the judges and interpretations in terms of law and litigation. In terms of the Alliance, I focus primarily in the legislative area. We cover all of the issues that Sister Jean spoke about, from online safety to farm worker rights, immigration, funding for prevention programs, survivor supports, and things of that nature. And so I wanted to give you a sense on the next slide of how difficult it can be to pass a bill. And so we have what are considered two chambers. A bill can originate either in the U.S. House of Representatives or the U.S. Senate. And that then needs to pass the corresponding chamber. And if that body agrees, then it goes to the president. The president can sign the bill or veto it. If he signs it, it then becomes law. So it can be a bit of a complex, time-consuming system. And on the next slide, I wanted to just give some context in terms of the U.S. voters and where people line up in terms of their identification of political positioning. And so in the last presidential election, of all of the eligible citizens that could vote, we had about 155 million votes cast. And we have a number of political parties here. The pie chart in the center of this slide represents who identifies as a Republican, a Democrat, and we have an increasing number of individuals who consider themselves independents, so they don't align with either political party. And then in terms of registered voters, we have different states who track different registered parties, and each of the pie charts represent a different perspective of how the US citizens view their political positions. So with that backdrop, I hope that you'll be able to take some of the things that I want to speak to and apply it in your own context, in your own countries. So why did I share all of this? On the next slide, you'll see, I think it's important to understand where everyone's coming from. Not everyone agrees. We have different political ideas. Everyone has different ideas for what policies might be best in terms of anti-trafficking methods. We also have a number of changes in terms of politicians. Our president is seated for 4 years. Our Congress is getting ready to cease the body that they have now. We're going to have elections later this year. And in January, we're going to have a whole group of some seasoned, some tenured, and then some new politicians that will be in charge in terms of hearing our bills and our policy positions. I think it's also important to remember that while we have a bill or we have a policy that we want to advocate for, it is not something that happens quickly. And oftentimes we need time to build consensus with like-minded partners, to build relationships with our legislators, and to really gain momentum, helping to educate the community and the general public about why something is needed. If we are trying to specifically implement, for example, a policy change or get a law passed, which we're working on now to get funding for survivors and for prevention programs, all of that work takes time. And we do that a lot through relationship building within our networks, with like-minded groups who could help support us, as well as the politicians who need to hear our viewpoints and then hopefully take action. What I tell all of our members is that, particularly when we're working in the legislative arena, your experience is your credential. There are not many people who understand the needs of survivors and who understand the complex issues that we're facing as a country. And so the lived experience that each of you have in working within your policy groups is really what your credential is in terms of having the validity in order to advocate. So on the next slide, how do we do this at the Alliance? Well, first of all, they were happy to have me as the first advocacy director. So they really felt there was a need to have somebody bring everybody together and help design our advocacy program. It's my privilege to work with a number of sisters and members across the nation. We have an advocacy working group who meets once a month, and we are representative in terms of a number of states. And so we have a number of experts across the country who bring their ideas, and we meet once a month to discuss hot topics and where we should spend our time. We also have a survivor group that are very in tune with our work and help give us recommendations in terms of what they think we should do. We have a specific system that helps push out our messages to our members so that they can make a connection with their legislators. We work, as I've mentioned, with both the administrative and legislative branch, but I think it's also important to note that within the US, we have a number of our members who work locally or within their states or perhaps within their regions on what we call public and private task forces. So these are specialized groups that are both private sector and public sector representatives who work on anti-trafficking within those specific areas. So what have I learned in terms of effectiveness? On the next slide, you'll see, I think it's important that we work in a bipartisan manner. We really need to make sure that we have national visibility in terms of recommending ourselves for what we think is important and what we think works. We do action alerts, as I mentioned, through an electronic system to connect our members to their representatives. We also meet in Washington, D.C. once a year for in-person meetings with our legislators and what we call our advocacy days. We focus in a number of other areas, including campaigns. For example, last year we did a campaign on child labor, which was focused very specifically on that topic and carried forward for several weeks. So on the next slide, I want to just very quickly give a sense about what some of the challenges are. We can have bills that stall. The political system may have a limited time. And in terms of our grassroots work, it's important that our members are informed. So sometimes they may not know what bills are coming about. They may not know how to take action. And everyone has a number of competing priorities. We have a lot of different things happening in our lives. So we really, from an advocacy perspective, have to try and get everybody together and acting in concurrent form based on what we think the recommendations should be. So I want to close out with some key strategies that I feel are effective. And the first thing is we have to work in a bipartisan manner. On the next slide, you'll see it doesn't matter what political group may be in power or what we ourselves may align with. It is important to hear each other and to work in a bipartisan fashion. We also take advocacy in a number of other ways. We have public campaigns. We went last year to the football draft here in the US, and we're also going to be hosting the World Cup. So we'll be doing a number of advocacy events, more as education and awareness around these public campaigns. I think, Sister Jean, you also mentioned private companies and supply chains. We also do what's called shareholder advocacy, where we make recommendations to private companies about what they should be doing.
Excuse me, Marilyn. One
Yes.
minute, please.
Thank you. And then on the next slide, you'll see we have some other strategies that I think have been effective. One, make sure that you're looking at your mission in the long term. We always want to have accomplishments in the short term, but much of this work takes time. Also, engage expertise outside of your membership. If you don't have the expertise or if you need support, please look for like-minded groups that can help carry forward our message. I think it's vital to anticipate and understand counter arguments and positions. You can't come to agreement with opposing groups if you don't understand where they're coming from. And I think it's very important in the beginning of your advocacy work to state your ask. You need to be very clear about what you want to accomplish. You need to stay aware of the political climate. Often events and things that happen can change what bills will pass. And use your time wisely. We have hundreds of bills that are introduced each session, and it's important to understand which bills have momentum, which have support, and which you think you can accomplish in terms of your objectives. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, and I'll be available for questions. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Marilyn. Creo que la misión de la Alianza efectivamente fue pionera en este trabajo contra la trata de personas y sabemos todo el bien que la red hace en todo Estados Unidos. Has mencionado justamente pues lo difícil que es pasar una propuesta de ley y sobre todo pues lo sabemos en Estados Unidos, ¿verdad? Que verdaderamente es muy difícil. Y pues has mencionado lo que sabemos y que es necesario, pues, que esa sea nuestra fuerza, la experiencia. La experiencia, dijiste, es nuestra credencial, porque efectivamente nadie como nosotras sabemos la realidad. ¿Por qué? Porque estamos cerca de esas vulnerabilidades. y refuerzas pues lo importante que es que se escuche nuestra voz. Entonces pues necesitamos justamente estar ahí en esos espacios. También mencionaste pues que la voz de los supervivientes es la fuerza y justamente pues son todas estas personas que ya van caminando con nosotras, con nosotros y que pueden dar pues dan la cara, ¿verdad? Son la muestra de nuestro trabajo. Y también pues reforzaste la importancia de trabajar en colaboración sin importar pues el partido. En la lucha contra la trata, pues vamos juntos y juntas. Muchísimas gracias, Marilyn.
So, what we're going to do now is invite you to join a breakout room, and you will be in your language group. So if you haven't chosen what language, you go to the globe down the bottom and choose your language there. So the breakout room will be for 20 minutes, and on your screen here, you can there's a poll happening. So we'll be able to, when we go into our groups. So there's questions guiding you for the breakout room. You can see them there. Which emerging human trafficking trend is the biggest risk in your context today? What one advocacy action can you take in the next year or so to create real change? And who must you engage to make it happen? So look, there's 20 minutes there. Maybe a quick introduction to each other. And then if someone in the group can just monitor to make sure everyone has a voice who wants to speak, and also for someone in the end who can just succinctly feedback to everyone, just something from your group that you would like to say to everyone. We've got over 100 people here today from many, many countries, so it'd be really good to share those real wisdom bits that come out. So we'll go into our breakout rooms. And if you still haven't got your language, just check down the bottom on the globe and choose your language if you have to re-choose that. So look, this is an opportunity now. We've got about 20 minutes probably for some question Q&A, and then also from the groups that you've been in, if there's something that you really want to share with everyone, that'd be fantastic. So both Jean and Marilyn have looked at the questions in the chat. And so Jean, would you like to just answer, give a response to the questions directed to you that are in the chat, please?
Sure. I think I'm okay. Am I? Yes, okay.
Yep.
Well, of course, the first one I'm very interested in was the in relation to how do you challenge, discourage others from the tokenism of survivors. And I suppose this is the work I've been doing. I'm working in homelessness 40 years this year, and it reminds me of how not to use others as like tokenism. So if you're really serious about survivor-led leadership within this trafficking world, what we're all talking about today, they have to be included in real power. What I talked about earlier about program design, finances, delivery, etc. So in other words, not to use them symbolically. So it has to be a real engagement. So I feel very strongly about that. And can I give you an example of that? A number of years ago, when we first got homelessness into the UN, we eventually got a panel. I was able to, not me, but somebody else asked to have a panel of people with the lived experience of homelessness that would talk in one of the big halls at the UN. And they asked me to be the moderator. And there were many, many member states there and other groups, etc. And I suppose I asked the question, I said to the audience, I was really talking to member states, you have now 4 experts here, people who had experienced different forms of homelessness. This is your opportunity to talk to them. And there was a dead silence. And I can't remember who started the conversation, which end it was, whether it was one of the women or whoever. But whatever happened in the moment, that conversation took over with the women, and I faded into insignificance. And for me, that was the most important moment of that time for me. So the people had the experience I didn't have, and so they were able to share. I've never forgotten that moment, because it's a good lesson in terms of, we don't have all the answers, but people with the lived experience have that experience. It's up to them to share it. So I feel strongly about it. So that's in relation to that. I think the other one was, what type of community resilience programs do you advocate for? I think strengthening local systems, empowering populations, etc., and providing whatever support is needed. I was saying off screen that Sophia Housing is opening a project in the Midlands here in Ireland next week for people with all experiences of homelessness. But it was the community really that took it on. It's the community that supports the different groups, and they're supporting, whether they're survivors to prevent trafficking or whatever. So I think it's just that inclusion, that we're all in advocacy, individually, locally, community-wise, most importantly, local governments. And then, of course, I'm passionate about going straight to the big doors, and what we do advocate at the UN in New York. And that advocacy, I was terrified of it at the beginning, but when I realized really it's just me and them and us, and we're all in this together. So it's not as difficult as one might expect it to be. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jean. It's just really very energizing to hear your responses there. Marilyn, would you like to address the questions directed to you?
Yes, thank you, Annette.
Please.
In the chat, there was a question about 82 million people being on a porn site, and one specific that was called a Rape Academy, which had 1,000 people sharing tips on how to rape your spouse and asking if any action has been taken. I am not familiar with the Rape Academy, although I will look into that. We at the Alliance are working on a number of bills, which include online safety for children. We have been very concerned about particularly some torture, momentum, and groups that have been targeting children with respect to that. I'm also aware how pornography leads not only to exploitation, but also human trafficking. And so we have been doing work both in terms of bills, but also in advocating to the tech companies that they need to do more in terms of watching and reporting child sexual abuse material and some of these other situations that, quite frankly, are horrific.
Thanks very much, Marilyn. What we might do now, I'm not sure there's there's really good comments in the chat. I can't see specific questions there. If anyone has a question now, though, can you just use the raise the hand? And it's a bit difficult where I need to go across to.
It's always the case. We don't have much time, but thank you, Annette, for this facilitation. And of course, Sister Jean, I know you would like to share your input as well and or insight this way. But we're out again. We really need to continue this conversation. I really appreciated the inputs from or insight from our participant as well. This is very moving. This is actually our time there, that we could share our realities in our context and as well how to deepen this collaboration and networking for really at this cost. So we come to the close. As many of you said, this is not only a time that we will be here, but we continue this collaboration and exchange information, exchange how we really proceed, especially in the aspect of advocacy. We have all heard about the insight from our speaker. Really thank Sister Jean and of course our Sister Kayula and Marilyn. It's been wake up since 3 o'clock in the morning, a third time. Really appreciated your effort. So this insight is very, very meaningful for many of us, and of course the experiences of our sisters or our partners at the ground. So this richness of our dialogue is all point to one clear truth: addressing human trafficking really requires sustained and collective action. I really thank everybody for this moment, for your also your collaboration, and of course we cannot stop or end human trafficking without this networking and collaboration. We really need to work together for a transformative action. So let us leave this space strengthened in our shared mission to confront the root causes of exploitation, to stand in solidarity, of course, with the victims and survivors, and to advocate for systemic change, We have heard a lot today, this morning, but of course, many of you are very expert on this one. We keep exchanging our information, how to advocate this systemic change. And again, this study packet, I would like you to use it, and give us also a feedback to international community. So we would like to hear from you. I don't want it to end up this way, but I'd like to take this opportunity also to give a floor to my colleague, which is from the international team, that I would like to give a floor to. Many of you know Marion. Marion, you can share your thoughts on this one. So I give you a floor, Marion, before I close this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Abby. I will be speaking in French. Donc, comme vous le savez, beaucoup d'entre vous le savent, je pars maintenant de Talitha. Mon dernier jour est le lundi prochain. Donc voilà, Sister Abby m'a proposé de dire quelques mots pour conclure mon temps avec vous. C'est émouvant pour moi de me tenir devant vous aujourd'hui, aussi après tout ce qu'on a entendu aujourd'hui. Ces 4 années passées à Talitha International, d'abord j'ai commencé avec Sœur Gabriella et puis continué avec Sœur Abby, ont été vraiment des moments de joie, de grâce et d'apprentissage, mais aussi de difficulté, de peur, de doute et de désespoir. Et comme nous l'avons entendu aujourd'hui, il semble que ces jours-ci, la haine et la violence gagnent du terrain chaque minute, qu'il n'est pas suffisant d'être humain pour être respecté, que les doubles standards et la protection de criminels continuent de proliférer, et que les innocents payent le plus lourd tribut des guerres et du changement climatique. Et pourtant, dans votre réseau, tissé par des liens de confiance et par un engagement collectif, j'ai vu quotidiennement l'espérance, la foi, l'amour, le respect de la dignité gagner du terrain. La lutte contre la traite est une vraie lutte. C'est une lutte collective qui s'oppose à des systèmes d'exploitation globaux, comme nous l'avons entendu aujourd'hui. C'est une lutte qui reçoit peu de reconnaissance, peu de ressources, qui parfois peut être ignorée ou dénigrée par nos proches et nos communautés. Mais c'est aussi une lutte personnelle contre nos propres préjugés, nos peurs, nos vulnérabilités, nos insécurités et nos jalousies. Cette lutte permanente doit nous permettre de pouvoir se tourner et voir les personnes, victimes et survivantes, de les accompagner en ouvrant des portes et en faisant confiance à leur capacité d'agir. Et voilà ce que j'ai appris à Talitha, que ces luttes collectives et personnelles vont main dans la main, qu'il ne faut jamais se résigner devant le mal, et surtout que je et que personne n'est seul et ne peut agir seul. Donc vraiment, je vous remercie du fond du cœur pour votre engagement, pour votre passion, pour vos luttes quotidiennes. Je continuerai à lutter dans un nouveau contexte, mais sachez que je vous emporte toutes, tous avec moi. Que Dieu vous bénisse. Merci.
Thank you, Marion, and surely you will be missed. Thank you for what you've done for Talitha International, as well as this global network. So again, for our closing, thank you once again to Sister Jean, to Marilyn, of course, Sister Kayula, and all the behind the scene, to Emma and all the interpreters, and for the organizer and technical technician, of course, with Gianluca. Thank you, and most important is for your participation as early as this hour. But thank you for your engagement and for your input as well. So again, to each of you being part of this global movement, thank you. And again, I would like to invite you to use our study packet, the TKICC, on behalf of TKICC, Sister Isabel and Sister Yvonne, who originally wrote this manual or this study packet. I really thank them, and of course the TKICC committee for this manual be more productive. So I'd like to continue to appreciate that connection. So may our collaboration continue to grow, and may our efforts bear lasting fruits in the lives of many that we accompany too. With that, I'd like to invite Sister Carmen to do their closing prayer. Thank you again.
Y así, con todo lo escuchado, aprendido y profundizado, damos gracias a Dios con esta oración final. Dios de la vida y de la dignidad. Hoy te damos gracias por este espacio compartido, por cada voz, cada experiencia y cada compromiso que se ha tejido en este encuentro. Te presentamos a todas las personas afectadas por la trata, especialmente a quienes viven en situaciones de mayor vulnerabilidad. Sostén su esperanza, fortalece su dignidad y abre caminos de libertad y vida nueva. Inspíranos a ser agentes de cambio, con corazones atentos, valientes y solidarios, capaces de reconocer y prevenir y transformar las realidades que generan injusticia. Bendice nuestras acciones, nuestros proyectos y el camino que seguimos construyendo en red para que, juntos y juntas, sigamos siendo luz, allí donde más se necesita. Que tu Espíritu nos acompañe y nos impulse siempre para que no dejemos de creer, de actuar y de luchar por un mundo sin trata. Amén.
Amen. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Again, we will share this recording video as well as hopefully the PowerPoint that can be shared to everybody. Thank you so much. And yeah, have a good day, have a good evening, have a good afternoon. Blessing. Thank you, Sister Jean.
Thank you.
Good night, Marilyn.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sister Abby.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you
Sister
very
Abby.
much.
Thank you,
Thank you all.
Carmen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Maria.
everyone.
Thank you, Abby.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you,
Thank
thank
you.
you. God
Bye.
bless you.
Bye-bye, guys.
Thank you, Emma.
Obrigada.
Merci.
Muito
Merci
obrigada,
bien.
Sister Maria.
Thank you, Sister
Amen.
Abby. Thank you.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias. Thank you, Annette. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Mary.
خلاص عملت ليف ميتنج.
خلاص بقى نعمل ايه؟
Amazing.
العام هو كله يسمع كلام
انا معاك.
Thank you. Bless
Thank
you.
you, Sister Mary.
Oh, thank you. You are great. Thank you. You did very well.
Thank
Bless
you.
you. Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy the afternoon.
I will definitely. Thank you. This is a really eye-opener Monday. Things are happening. Jesus, they
A
are very
lot.
evil.
A lot. Yeah. When you listen to different people, a lot. So we all need to be involved, all of us.
No, Monday, it's a big challenge.
Big one.
Okay, my dear. We'll talk later.
All right. Okay. Bye.